This is the first video of Django Web Framework course for beginners, which will be divided into several parts that should cover the basics. Then we will create several projects together, like weather app, a news app. Also, we will create a more advanced application using Google OAuth to fetch emails from scratch. Okay, so we have a lot to do and let's get started. Now, the prerequisites to learn Django is your Python knowledge. And if you see yourself as an intermediate Python programmer, you won't find any problems following along and learning Django. Okay, so what is Django? Django is a Python-based web framework that allows you to quickly create efficient web applications. It's also called Batteries Included Framework because Django provides built-in features for everything, including Django admin interface, default database, which is SQLite 3, and many other features that makes Django a great framework that cares about the whole administrative aspect of the project while giving you the space and time to concentrate on creating the application itself and not to worry too much about repetitive tasks. When you're building a website, you always need a similar set of components, a way to handle user authentication, like signing in, signing out, sign up for new users. You're also going to need a management panel for your website, forms, a way to upload files, etc. So Django gives you ready-made components to use, which is great for rapid development. So why Django? Django is a rapid web development framework that can be used to develop fully fleshed web applications in a short period of time. It's also easy to switch database in Django framework. Basically, the standard or the default database is SQLite 3, but you can change the engine. You can make it PostgreSQL or SQL Alchemy if you want. It has a built-in admin interface, which makes easy to work with it. And finally, Django is a fully functional framework that requires nothing else. In fact, it has thousands of additional packages available for use. Let me talk in brief about the Django architecture. So, Django is based on something called MVT, or Model View Template Architecture, which is a design pattern for developing a web application. MVT structure has three components, as you can see on the screen. It has the model, it has the view, and the template. So the model here, which is responsible for maintaining your data, it's the logical data structure behind the entire application and is represented by a database, generally relation databases such as MySQL or PostgreSQL. And the view is the user interface, what you see in your browser when you render a website. Usually it's represented by HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Jinja. And Jinja is the main template language in Django. And finally, we have the template, which consists of static parts of the desired HTML output, as well as some special syntax describing how dynamic content will be inserted. And I know this is theoretical, but once we get to install Django and work with it, the idea will be clearer. Alright, so let's go ahead and start installing Django. So first of all, you will need to have Python 3 installed on your system, obviously. If it's not installed, just go to python.org and you can find, so this is the main page. Go to downloads and you get immediately even here Python 3.9. This is the latest version, 3.9.1. So you can download it there. Don't worry, it's super simple to install it. Once you get Python installed, we will need pip installed. So before you install pip on Windows or Mac or Linux, you need to check if pip is already installed. So let's type this following command. We will type pip help. So if pip responds like you can see on the screen, then pip is already installed. Otherwise, there will be an error saying that the program could not be found. And pip is automatically installed with Python 2.7, I think, and Python 3.4. Pip also comes with the virtual env and pyenv for virtual environment, which will lead me to the next point, which is installing virtual environment. This is not mandatory, but you can do it if you like. This will allow to edit the dependency that your system generally wouldn't allow. and also keep your project in a box, metaphorically speaking, of course, from the general settings of your system. So this way, when you install the dependencies for that specific project you're working on, it doesn't get installed globally on your system, but only inside your virtual environment. And let me create a folder, Django 1. We'll open that with Visual Studio Code. And let's install virtual environment together. So pip install virtual env, like that. For me, it's already installed, but you might have different result. So we will type virtual env space env underscore site, for example. Can be any name that you want. And you can see immediately that it has created a folder called env underscore site, or the name that you have given to your folder. Okay, perfect. So if we will click on env site, you will have scripts, you will have lib, include. Don't worry about all of that. What we are interested in is to get inside. So let's change directory or cd to env underscore site. And if you make dir or ls, so we have the components which are inside here, include libscripts, tcl, and license.txt. And what we're interested in is the folder scripts. So we will change directory to scripts. Then if you will make dir or ls for list, you will find that you have activate. So if you just run activate, it should work and you will be inside your virtual environment. You can run your application inside that virtual environment. Feel free to do it. I won't be doing it, but I just wanted to show you how to do it. Now the most interesting part, how to install Django. So still inside our command or terminal, we will type pip install Django. Okay, and once Django is installed, you will need to initiate a project. So we are inside a folder called Django 1, and what we're going to type is Django-admin space start project in one word space and your project name. So let's give our project name of Mega Man, for example. So the project name will be called Mega Man, and Django has created a Mega Man folder on the left side right here. And if we will enter Mega Man, we can find that we have a folder called Mega Man, so a second folder called Mega Man, and a file called manage.py. So let's start by manage.py. Let me show you what is manage.py. Editing this file is certainly a very bad idea because it contains a script, as you can see here, that we can use to perform some useful operations on the web application or site. So definitely something that you might want to avoid doing is editing anything. And inside our second Mega Man, we have a bunch of files. We have init.py, ASCII, settings, urls, and wizkey.py. Init.py, this is to tell you that the project, whatever the project name is a Python package, which is a collection of different packages or Python files that work together. Next, you have ASCII and wizkey. You don't need to worry too much about these two files, but basically these two files will help your app in terms of production if you decided to deploy your application. Settings, this is a file that contains all the settings for our web application. And you remember I was telling you about changing the database. You have the engine by default is SQLite 3, and if you want to change that, you can simply change to PostgreSQL, SQL Alchemy, or any ORM system. This is the general settings for your application. Django created this for you, so you won't be worried about any of the settings. For example, this secret key right here, you can avoid that when you deploy it in time of production. You don't want to show that, must be kept away. Also, debugging mode should be set to false in time of production. All right, installed apps, and when we'll create our app, we will edit the name of the app here in installed apps. So Django knows that there is a new app created and that the settings should take this app in consideration. The last file is urls.py, and this takes care of the routing to different URLs based on users' requests. So depending on the user's input, he or she can see a different outcome or a different route or different URL basically. All right, so let's just close this and open the terminal. And in order to run your project, you will have to use the manage.py, this one that we have talked about, followed by another command. I will show you how to do it. So we are inside Django 1. We need to access Megaman. So cd Megaman. We need to type Python, then manage.py, followed by a command called run server. So we have no issues. 17 unapplied migrations, and we'll talk about this later. So now the server is basically listening on port 8000. So if you will copy this URL or simply hit Control and click. Okay. All right. The install worked successfully. Congratulations. You are seeing this page because debug equal to true is in your settings file and you have not configured any URLs. So you get here the Django documentation, tutorial, Django community, and the Django documentation is really awesome. I mean, it's very well written. You can learn a lot from the official documentation of Django. All right, so this will conclude the first part where we have installed pip, set up the virtual environment, installed Django, and got it up and running. The next video we will create our first application. Hey guys, welcome back. So what we have done so far is that we have launched the Django server, but we did not create any apps yet. In fact, let me create just a folder and I will open it with my bash tool. And let's just review what we have done last time. So to create a project, we will type Django-admin, start project, followed by the name of the project. Let's call our project World Tour. We're going to create a World Tour project. Okay, perfect. So let's actually check out. We have World Tour. So let's enter World Tour. Now let's create a basic app in your Django project. What we will need to do is simply we will type Python manage.py start app followed by the name of the application. So just to make one thing clear here, World Tour is the name of the project, the whole project. And inside the whole project of World Tour, we can have different applications. We can have, let's say, an app for Euro tours or Europe tours, Asia tours, Africa tours, and so on. So for this particular application, I will just call it Europe. And as you can see inside World Tour folder or project, we have a second folder called World Tour, manage.py, which we have seen the last video, and folder called Europe, which is the main application. Okay, so let me close this for a moment and I will open folder using Visual Studio Code. So as we saw, World Tour, inside it there is World Tour, and we have seen the last time what is init.py, ASCII, settings, URLs, and WSGI. Okay, we have manage.py. We said that it's a very bad idea to modify anything in this file. And we have Europe, which is the main application. So what I want to do now is I want to check out this file called views.py. So here you can write a code that ultimately decides what the user sees when he goes to a particular route. And if you recall from the first video when we have discussed the Django architecture, and we said that it's based on something called MVT structure or model view template, views file represent the view element in the MVT structure. And let me show you what we can do. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import HTTP response from Django.http, import HTTP response. And we will define a function called index which will take a request, and we want to return HTTP response, and we will say Europe trips. Okay, good, but this is not enough. So inside our Europe application, we will create another file called urls.py. And this is not the same file as urls.py inside the world tour folder here. Okay, but this urls is very specific to this Europe application. So inside here, we want to import a couple of things. The first thing we need to import is path. So say from Django.urls, I want to import path, and from dot import views. And dot means simply the current directory or the current folder. I want to import views, which is this file right here. And what I want to do next is I want to declare a variable called URL patterns, and this will be equal to a list. And inside that list, I want to get the path to an empty string, which means an empty route or a default route. So when the user will enter an empty route, I want Django to go to views.py, and I want to invoke the index function. Okay, so on the web page, in the URL, when you will enter just the default route or /, I want Django to open views and invoke that function right here. Okay, so URLs and views are associated together. So we have finally created an app, but to render the app using URLs, we need to include the app in our main project so that the URLs directed to that app can be rendered. So let's explore that. So we will need to go to our world tour. So let's close the application and open world tour, and we will go to the other URLs file. And inside here, I want to add a second line, and this basically will say path, an empty string, okay, and I want to include and then the project app, right? So the project app is called Europe. So Europe.urls, and we need to add include here. Okay, perfect. So let's try that out. Let's actually save that, and let's open the folder using bash tool. Again, we will enter world tour folder, and just to check out, okay, so what we will say is python manage.py, and let's run the server. Okay, so the server is running on the local host on port 8000, and let's open the browser. So 127.0.0.1.8000, and voila, we get Europe trips. Okay, so this was a bit technical. You will need to do a little bit of configuration before you can render anything on the browser. And this is it. So congratulations, you have created your first web application using Django. In the next video, we are going to talk a little bit more about databases and migrations and how we can work on that and how we can add trips to our database and display them in the shell, then on the web browser. Okay, so we have learned how to create a project and run the server, how to create a basic app. Now I want to show you how to set up the database for this application. So what I want to introduce now is models.py, which is inside our Europe application, and it's empty for now. And Django by default says create your models here. So if we want to create a model that represents a Euro trip from one European country to the other, we might define a class, let's call it trip. So let's create a class, we'll call that trip. Inside here, the settings, models.model. So we need an origin country, we need a destination, we need the number of nights, and we need the price for that trip. So we'll need an origin country, and this will be equal to models.character field with a maximum length of 64 characters. And we want a destination country, so it's exactly the same. We'll just change the name of the variable. And we want the number of nights, so models.integer field, because it's not a character, it's rather an integer. And we can say the same thing on price. Okay, so we have created our class trip, which will serve the purpose of being a blueprint to our database. So we don't have to worry about creating a table or adding some records or updating them or dropping any of these records, because Django will take care of all of that. And as your application starts to get bigger in size as a result of lots of interactions with the clients, for instance, you probably want to add changes to your code. Classes, for instance, or any other area of your application. Therefore, the databases should also be changed as a natural reflection to that. It would be quite tedious if every time you change something in your code, you have to reflect these changes in your database files manually. And this is the role of migrations right here, which has only one file called init.py, and currently it's empty. Okay, so migrations will take care of all what we have discussed previously. It detects automatically what are the changes that were made in your file and reflect these changes in your database. And how to do that? Actually, before I show you that, there is one more configuration step that we need to do in settings.py. So inside our installed apps variable right here, we need to add in the first line, we will add the name of the application, which is Europe, inside a string. So europe.apps.europe.config. So we will type Europe config with a capital C like that. And the logic behind this actually is inside our Europe application, there is a file called apps.py. And this simply has one class called europe.config, and it has one parameter which is app.config with the name of Europe, the main name of the application. And Django does that just to say that I'm aware of your application and the name of this application is Europe. Just the most important thing is that in settings and installed apps, you need to insert this line right here, the name of the application apps.europe.config. We might just put Europe, the E capital, like that. I will just open my bash terminal. I'm inside the folder. I will need to enter world tour. Then in your terminal, go ahead and type this with me. So we'll type Python manage.py followed by a command called make migrations. Make migrations. And what this command does actually, that it looks to models.py and it looks to any changes that might happen or happened in that file and automatically will make migrations. In other words, reflecting the changes in your database. So as you can see inside Europe folder, inside migrations folder, Django has created this file right here, 0001_initial.py. This file right here. So it has a class of migration with the dependencies, and this is basically the code that we have written inside our models. Okay, so we have origin, destination, nights, and price, and the same thing here. So these are the fields, right? And notice that Django has created ID for us. I didn't create ID in the models, but Django has created ID. So each time we will add a record, this will be auto-incremented. So the first trip will have an ID of 1, the second trip automatically will have an ID of 2, and so on. Origin, models.character field, max length 64, and the rest of the code that we have written in models.py. But let me actually show you what's inside that 0001_initial.py file. So still inside my world tour folder, I will type Python manage.py SQL migrate and the name of the app followed by 0001. Okay, take a look at that. So we have here begin, create model trip, And this is very similar to our SQLite code that we have seen in our SQLite 3 course. So it starts by creating model trip, so to create a database. Then we create a table called euro_trip with an ID. It's an integer, not null, which means that it shouldn't be empty. Primary key, which means this is a primary key via which I can relate to other tables. Auto increment, which means that it will be incremented automatically. I don't have to add each time an ID for the record. Then origin, varchar 64 not null, nights, integer not null, price, integer not null. Then followed by commit, which means save or commit to these changes and I'm done. And origin and destination should be here. I think it's not well presented in bash, so let me actually show it to you here in the terminal. We will make this bigger. So again, let's get inside our world tour and we will type python manage.py sql migrate Europe 0001. Okay, so it's clear here. As we said, the ID, the origin, we have destination here. It was cut here for some reason. I'm sorry for that. We have nights, which is integer, not null, price, integer, and not null. So this is SQL code that I didn't have to write. It was generated for me by Django's migration system, just simply by looking in what I said I wanted in my database right here in the models. Right? And Django did that for me. So now I want to apply the migration to the database. Till now we didn't apply the migration. So we want to create the table inside the database basically. This is what we want to do. So the database will be called trip, as you can see below here. And the table will be called Europe trip. This is the name that Django has given to my table. And it will have the attributes that we have set here. Okay, so how we're going to do that? Well, let me just maximize the terminal. So what we'll need to type is python manage.py migrate. Hit enter. Fantastic. What that did, that it has applied all the migrations, as you can see here, applying content types, auth, admin, 01, 02, 03, and so on. Okay, so it has applied all the migrations, and even the last one applied that was created to us, 0001_initial. And now my database will have a table that represents the trips via this Europe application. Okay, so this concludes the video. The next video we are going to see how we can work with the shell and how we can add trips to our database. So thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, welcome back. So the last time we have created models and we have applied migrations to the database, including the 0001 initial file. And today we are going to create some trips actually. We're going to add records to our database. So let me close the browser and let's quit the server. So Django allows us to access something called shell. It's much like Python interpreter, but shell is only attached to this Django application. It's only relative to this one. And this allows us to directly modify the database without too much effort actually. You need to be inside your project directory, world tour in our case, and you will type python manage.py shell. It looks like a Python interpreter, as I said. And the first thing we need to do now is we need to import the trip class. So from models.py, I will need to import the trip class. Okay, so let's do that. I will say from Europe.models. So from Europe application.models, which is the name of the file, I want to import the trip class. Then what I want to do is I want to create an object or a trip object. So we will call that trip1 will be equal to the trip class. We will need origin, let's say Rome. We will need a destination, which will be Paris, for instance. We'll need the number of nights, let's say 5 nights, and we need a price, 350 euros. Okay, good. So trip 1, it's a trip object basically. And if you will type trip1.origin, you'll get Rome, trip1.destination, you'll get Paris, trip1.price, 350, and trip1.nights, you'll get 5. But if you want to print the trip itself, it will only display a trip object. So this is not really helping me by just looking to trip object. And what I need actually is I want a string representation of that record. Just to tell me that the trip from Rome to Paris with 5 nights costs 350 euros. Okay, and we are going to do this we are going to change in models.py. So let's exit this for a moment and let's open models.py. And inside our trip class right here, we will define stir, and I have a video on the stir method versus the wrapper method. You might want to check that out. Self as a parameter, and I want to return a string format telling me that, so this is the way that we are going to format our string, right? So self.id, self.origin to self.destination for self.nights, costs, and self.price. Just be careful, I made a typo here. It's nights with 1 S, origin, price, destination, and ID. Okay, let's open the terminal. cd world tour, need to be inside your directory, and python manage.py shell, and we will import from Europe.models. We will import the trip, and let's recreate that trip one again, that trip one object one more time. Then we want to save the trip object. We want to save that record. So what we will do is we will say trip1.save. And this is very similar to the commit command in SQL. When you write a bunch of lines in SQL, by the end of it, you type commit, which means that I'm okay with the changes and I want to save these changes to the database. This is very similar to that. So if you want to access any of these attributes like origin, destination, and so on, we can do this like before. So origin, which is Rome, trip1.destination, which is Paris, and the same will be for nights and price. But the most important thing is the string representation. So if you just say trip1, you'll get trip with ID number 1, Rome to Paris for 5 nights, costs 350 euros, which is a better representation than before when we only had a query for the object. Okay, now let's talk about rendering templates. So one more feature that we want for the application to do is to not only display text in the shell like we have seen, but to return an HTML template. And what we will need to do is that we will go to views.py, and instead of this statement right here, the return statement for HTTP response and just displaying Europe trips as a header, we want to substitute that by return render, and we want to render the request, and the second argument is the name of the HTML template. So it will be trips/index.html, and I did not create index.html yet, so let's go ahead and do it. So inside Europe application right here, I will create a folder. I will call that folder templates, and inside templates I will create another folder. I will call it trips, and inside trips I will create index.html. And I want just a simple boilerplate for HTML. In the title I will say just trips. In the body I will give it h1 and we'll say Europe trips. Okay, so this should do the same thing. So let's open the terminal. And we will have the same thing. H1 Europe trips with a title here, trips. And what we want to do is to retrieve the trips stored in the database and render them on the web page. This is our ultimate goal. And basically this is done through something called the Django template language. So the way that Django passes information into the template is through a context dictionary. So let's go to views, and let's just put this right here, and I will create context variable, which is a dictionary in fact, and any dictionary has a key value pair, as you know. So the keys are the names of the things that we want to plug into the template, and the values are what we want actually to plug in. So let's say that the first key will be called trips, and it has a value of the name of the class, which is trip.objects.all. And this is the same as we were typing in shell, just to display all the trips inside the trip class. So we want to import trip from models.py file. So from current directory models, I want to import trip. Okay. All right, and we are good to go. Just the last modification we will need to do in the index.html, we will need to change that and write some Jinja code. So we'll create unordered list and the % for trip in trips. And you want to close the for loop by saying just again the % or percentage sign and for. Okay. And in between here, we'll create another UL. And we want to return each trip, or to print each trip. Just before we try that, don't forget to add the third argument, which is the context. Okay, in your index function in the views.py. Okay, so we have three arguments: the request, we have the index.html, and we have the context, which is the dictionary that should print all the records in our database. All right, let's give that a try. So cd world tour python manage.py, and let's run the server. Okay, cool. Open that. And voila, Europe trips, and the only record stored in our table in the database, which is from Rome to Paris for 5 nights, costs 350 euros with an ID, and it's really neat. Okay, and this is because of the stir function that we have created in our models.py. In the next and final video, I'm going to show you something called the admin tool in Django, and we will see how we can add trips not only using the shell, but using that admin tool. Okay, so thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. So in the last 4 parts, we have launched the web server, we have created a basic application, we have learned how to deal with migrations and store data in the database. Also, we learned how to add records using the shell system, and finally how to render an HTML template using Django template language. What we will take a look at now is how to add or edit data inside our database, but not through typing commands in shell. I don't want to do that each time I want to add a trip, for example, or if I want to update the price. It would not be so time effective if every time I will have to open the shell, import the model, make the changes, then save them. But instead, I would like to go to a part of my website where I can click add a new trip from this to that location, or update the existing trips. So Django is designed in a way that it allows the interaction of different data types and input very easy using a built-in app called admin, which makes it very easy to add and modify data. So go ahead and open your Europe application inside admin.py. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to import from the current directory from models.py. I want to import the trip class. And you see that Django has added a comment here saying register your models. So we will do that. So let's register our trip model. And the syntax will be admin.site.register. And I will pass the name of the class, which is trip. So the admin app is a built-in app in Django, as we said, and makes it very easy to update existing models. And what I'm doing here is that I'm registering the trip model with my admin site. And this allows the admin to manipulate the trips. And in order to access the admin site, you're going to need to log into the admin site itself. So we will need to set up a login and a password for you. Okay, so let me maximize the terminal and let's shut the Explorer, see the world tour. And this will go like this: python manage.py create super user. Okay, so we need a username, we'll say Beck, email address, okay, password. Okay, now the super user created successfully. And we will take a look to the admin site now. So let me start the server. So this is what we have built the last time, only one trip or one record in the database. And what I will do now is in the URL here, / followed by admin. And take a look at that. So let's log in back as username and your password. Okay, so we have here a welcoming message, welcome back. You can view site, change password, or log out. And I didn't create that. Django has created this admin tool for me. It's a built-in web application created to help you to manipulate input. So you see the name of the application, Europe. We have trips, so if you will click on that, you will have action. You can only delete the selected trips, so we have only one trip. Okay, Rome, Paris, we can modify that actually. We can delete it, okay. We can actually add trip, so let's add a trip. We will say from Prague to Madrid. Nights, we will say 5 nights, and this will cost 400 euros, for instance. And we'll save that. Okay, perfect. The trip number 2 with the ID 2, Prague to Madrid for 5 nights cost 400 euros, was added successfully. So now this has been added to the database. I didn't have to type in the shell to type commands. What I did is I typed the name of the origin, the destination, the number of nights, and the coast. Save, and that's it. So if we'll take a look to the site now, we have a second record that has been added to our database. And we can add or we can change. So take a look to change. We can change that. If I want to change the price, if I want to change the number of nights, or the destination, or even if I want to delete it. So if we'll delete that. Okay, are you sure you want to delete the trip to Prague to Madrid? Okay, yes, I'm sure. It was deleted successfully. And I wanted to show you something very quickly inside here in the URLs. Actually in the world tour, the project itself. If you see here in the URL patterns, you will find a path, and this one I didn't create it, but it was created or generated by Django. And this is the admin site.urls. Okay, so this is admin / which you have to type in the URL after the port 8000 in order to be able to enter the admin website. So this comes out of the box with all Django apps, and all what I needed to do is to just register the models with the admin site on the admin.py file. So this is a quick walkthrough on how you can render CSS and image files in your Django project. So let me just start by creating a folder. I will call it demo, and open that with VS Code. And let's create just a demo project. So we'll say Django admin start project and the name of the project. So we'll call it demo project. Then we'll change directory to demo project and we'll start an app. So Python manage.py start app, and we'll call that demo app. All right, perfect. So we have the main folder demo project, and inside we have a second one called demo project, holds the same name, and the main app here. All right, so let's start by just following some configuration steps. Go ahead and open settings, and this is the first thing that we will do. So let's actually add to installed apps the name of the app, which is demo app. All right, so this is the first thing we need to do. Next, go to the bottom of that file, and you will find that static URL equal to static, and this is the name of the folder. So you'll find here a comments by Django admin itself saying that static files like CSS, JavaScript, or images, these files are very specific. And in order to be rendered, we will need to include a folder called static. And inside that folder, we will have our images, our CSS, or JavaScript files. Okay, so for instance, we will have in a static folder, we might have images and CSS files. So to differentiate, we will have media URL variable, and this will be equal to a folder, and we will call it images. Then the static files underscore dirs will be equal to OS, and here I'm specifying the path for that static folder. So os.path.join, then the base directory, comma, and static. So this is to tell Django whenever you want to, here there is a C missing, whenever you want to render any static files, go ahead to the base dir and the folder will be called static. So let's go to our main app. Whatever the name of your app, the static folder must be inside that app. All right, so let's call the folder static. Inside static, I can have another folder called images, another folder, let's say CSS, and another folder called JS for JavaScript. And this is actually out. Inside static folder, I have CSS folder, images folder, and JavaScript folder. Now, the next thing that I need to do is I need to modify in the URLs. Go ahead to URLs. So we will need to import the settings from the Django configuration system, and we will need also to import static. So we'll say from Django.conf, I want to import the settings, and from Django.conf.urls.static, I want to import static. All right, good. And there are other things that we will need to modify in this file. So let's take this one right here, because we'll need a path to the views where we will have our function, and we'll call it index. All right. So let's immediately import from demo app, or the name of your application. We want to import the views file. And let's go ahead to views, and let me just save settings. Okay, good. So in views, I need a function which will render the index.html or the HTML page. Okay, so let's create a function called index, which takes a request as a parameter. Then we will say the template will be equal to main.index.html. So here I'm saying the path for template will be a folder, will be called main, and inside main we will have index.html, which we will do in a bit. And what I want to do is I want to return and render the request and the template, which is the index.html. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead directly to demo app and let's create a folder. I will call it templates. And inside templates, I want to create another folder called main. And this is by convention. You can just create main in the main directory of demo app. It doesn't matter. Inside main, here I will create index.html. And let's have a boilerplate for index. Here in the title, I will say demo app. Okay. I will just put this image in images. So we have an image saying boom, this picture right here. And in CSS, I will create style.css. And let's have main settings for the file. So background color, let's say black. And let's have the color itself, let's say Azure. That's okay. All right. So now I have my picture or image in images folder. I have style.css in CSS folder. Now the last step is to render properly these two files in index.html. And the first thing we need to do is we need to load static. So this statement is very important if we want to render these files, I mean the CSS and image files, and JavaScript potentially if you want. If we want to render them properly in the HTML template, we need to type load static. But before we do that, let's actually test it. So let's give an h1 tag, hello world. All right, seems okay. Let's open the terminal. Let's actually make migrations and migrate. So we will enter the demo project folder. Then we will say Python manage.py, make migrations. And there is an error, static files dirs, so it's in the settings. And there is a comma here, don't forget it, I always do. If you don't make a comma here, you will have this error, right? So let's try that one more time. Okay, cool. Now let's migrate. So okay, perfect. So now let's actually run the server. All right, on the local host. And we have hello world. Okay, so now we are sure that everything is working properly. Now let me show you how to render the CSS and the image files. So let's start by the image. So let me actually put it below the hello world. So I will have an image tag, and inside the source I will open and close curly braces and two percentage signs, and I will say static space, use the single quotes, go to the images folder and grab the boom.png, and I will say alternative is image, and style, let's give it some styling. So we'll say width will be equal to 120 pixels. Let's give it also margin bottom to -50 pixels. All right, let's save that. Then go here and let's hit refresh, and boom, we have the picture. Now let's do the same thing for the CSS file. So we'll have a link, and this is the Django template language. Okay, so we'll need to respect that order. So curly braces, and just attach to them on the left and right side the two percentage signs. Then we'll type static, and I want Django to access the CSS folder, which is in static, and inside the CSS folder I want the style.css. All right, we'll save that, come here, refresh, and boom. So this was how to render CSS and image files in your Django project. I hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next videos.